Let's start the course with defining the subject. What is a contract? Essentially, a contract is an enforceable promise. As we will see, a contract needs consideration in order to make a promise enforceable. We will discuss this in more detail. At this point, suffice it to say that essentially there needs to be a mutual give and take between the parties. The difference between contracts and promises is, therefore, that promises are not legally enforceable. Only moral obligations arise. In contrast, a party can enforce a contract in a court of law if necessary. Having defined the basic notion of a contract, let's have a look at the economic framework that forms the theoretical underpinnings of contracts. Economically speaking, a contract is an exchange relationship. People enter into exchange relationships with one another because they want or need something. And unless we are completely satisfied with what we have, we will always enter into exchange relationships. That is, we will perpetually enter into contracts. Let's illustrate this using a very basic scenario. Imagine a world consisting of only two commodities, apples and oranges, and only two consumers, A and B. Both A and B have different preferences, but each want to consume some quantity of both commodities. What will likely happen? We can be almost sure that unless A and B are already satisfied with the initial allocation of those commodities, they will negotiate a trade. A will give up some of his apples in exchange for some of B's oranges. B will be doing the opposite. She will give up some of her oranges for some of A's apples. The effect should be to make both parties feel richer than before the trade, because they have a mix of assets that they find more suitable. This is true even though A and B are essentially in conflict, each seeking to drive the hardest bargain they can against the other. The exchange will, in most cases, lead not only to individual advantages, but also to mutual advantages. That being so, it would be wasteful in economic terms if the exchange did not take place. Hence, contracts, and by extension the law governing them, are essential for our society and our individual and collective welfare. If it's true that contracts are beneficial for all parties involved, doesn't that mean that the parties will always stick to their promises? After all, if they don't, they can't reap the benefits of the exchange relationship. And if it's true that it's always in a party's interest to keep its promise, why do we need enforceable contracts? As it turns out, contracts are needed for a number of reasons. First, in many contracts, there is a gap between the point where a promise is made and the point where the action that was promised needs to be carried out. That gap creates the potential for parties to change their minds during this time. For example, let's say someone agrees in March to buy 1 barrel of oil for $70. By June, the market price is only $40. In that case, the buyer has no incentive anymore to buy the oil for $70. Unless there is an enforceable contract, the buyer might not honor the promise to buy at the agreed price. Therefore, the law has to step in and help enforce the promise and deter breaches of contracts. Second, there can be negative effects that only manifest themselves after the exchange. For instance, in our previous example, it could turn out that the oil that is delivered is of inferior quality. In the absence of contract law, the buyer would have difficulties getting any compensation from the seller, given that the exchange of goods against money already took place. Third, contract law has an important gap-filling function. Promises exchanged between parties may be vague or lack the necessary details, but contract law provides answers to questions that may come up in the course of or in the aftermath of an exchange, even if the parties didn't think of them or didn't address them before any problems arose. Contract law, in the last instance through application by the courts, can fill these gaps. These are the reasons contract law is needed. Contract law promotes certainty and predictability, and it helps individuals and businesses to plan ahead and form reliable, secure, and enforceable commercial relationships.